Zoreth, the alien champion, was unlike anything Earth had ever seen. His race, the Xylar, had conquered countless worlds and defeated many different species in battles that shook the very foundations of entire galaxies. His people were known for their immense strength, speed, and intelligence. Zoreth was their finest warrior, a symbol of power and dominance, revered by all who knew him. But now, Zoreth had been sent on a new mission. His task was simple: travel to Earth and enter a human boot camp to prove his race's superiority over the weak, fragile humans. The journey to Earth had been long, but Zoreth felt no fear or doubt. He had faced countless challenges before, and Earth's primitive technology and defenses posed no real threat. He would enter their boot camp, defeat whatever they threw at him, and show them the true power of the Xylar. As his spaceship descended through the atmosphere, Zoreth's mind was filled with anticipation. He had seen humans from afar, but now he would experience them up close. The moment his ship landed on the dusty Earth ground, Zoreth stepped out, towering over the humans who gathered to greet him. He could see the looks of awe and fear in their eyes. They had never seen anything like him before. Zoreth's skin was a deep shade of blue. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and his muscular body seemed to radiate strength. The humans, however, were nothing special to him. They were small, weak, and unimportant compared to the might of the Xylar. The boot camp was located in a remote area, far away from any major human cities. It was surrounded by high fences, and Zoreth could hear the sounds of human recruits shouting and struggling in the distance. This was where they trained to become soldiers, though Zoreth doubted they could ever be more than cannon fodder in a real war. As he walked through the camp gates, the human instructors looked at him nervously, unsure of how to handle someone of his size and power. But Zoreth did not let this bother him. He had seen fear in the eyes of his enemies many times before. This would be no different. The first test of the boot camp was a series of physical challenges designed to test strength, speed, and endurance. Zoreth stood at the starting line, ready to show the humans what true strength looked like. He could already tell they were intimidated by him, but that was exactly what he wanted. As the challenge began, he shot forward, his alien body moving with incredible speed. The humans struggled to keep up, their legs trembling as they tried to match his pace. But Zoreth was far ahead, his powerful strides eating up the ground beneath him. He could hear the instructors yelling in the distance, urging the humans to push harder. But Zoreth knew there was no way they could catch him. He was simply too fast. The first part of the test was over in a flash, and Zoreth was the clear winner. He had completed the course in half the time of any human recruit, and the others were barely finishing. As he stood at the finish line, panting lightly, he looked over his shoulder at the humans still struggling behind. They were weak. How could they possibly think they could challenge him? But then, something strange happened. A human recruit, a young man named Jack, pushed himself harder than the others. Zoreth watched as Jack gritted his teeth, refusing to stop, even as his body begged him to slow down. His face was red, and his muscles trembled from exhaustion, but Jack did not give up. Zoreth felt a flicker of surprise. Humans were weak, yes, but this one had something different. He wasn't fast like Zoreth, but his determination was impressive. As Jack crossed the finish line, gasping for air, Zoreth couldn't help but feel a strange sensation inside him. He had won easily, but this human spirit had somehow touched something deep within him. He had not expected this. He had always viewed humans as inferior, but now, for the first time, he wondered if there was something more to them than he had first realized. The next part of the test was a series of hand-to-hand combat drills. Zoreth was eager for this challenge. After all, he had fought in countless battles and faced the strongest warriors across the galaxy. He was confident that no human could defeat him in combat. As he entered the ring, he saw his first opponent, a tall, muscular man who looked like he had spent years training for this moment. Zoreth was sure this human would be no match for him. but the man's eyes were filled with determination. Zorath smiled to himself. This would be over quickly. The bell rang and the fight began. Zorath's movements were fast and precise, his strikes landing with crushing force. His opponent struggled to keep up, barely able to block Zorath's blows. In moments, Zorath had the man on the ground, his body pinned beneath Zorath's immense weight. The crowd of recruits watched in silence, amazed by the sheer power of Zorath's fighting skills. He had won without breaking a sweat. The human on the ground groaned but did not give up. This was what Zorath had expected. He was a warrior, and this was a test. The humans had to prove their worth. But then something unusual happened. Zorath saw the human's eyes, wide with fear, and for the first time, Zorath felt a strange sensation in his chest. Fear was something Zorath had never experienced. His people had conquered worlds, defeated enemies, and crushed all who stood in their way. Fear was a weakness, but as he looked down at the human, something deep inside him stirred. The human was afraid, but his fear didn't stop him. He didn't give up. Zorath stood there, momentarily frozen, staring into the eyes of the human beneath him. This was unexpected. Zorath had never thought about fear the way he was now. He had always seen it as something that made others weak, but now he was beginning to wonder if fear had a different purpose. The humans didn't fight because they were strong. They fought because they feared losing, because they were determined to survive. Zorath had never felt that kind of fear before. He had always been the one who brought fear, never the one who felt it. As the day continued, Zorath's mind wandered. He had expected to breeze through this boot camp with ease, showing the humans how inferior they were. But now he found himself facing something he hadn't anticipated. A challenge not just to his physical strength, but to his understanding of fear and resilience. The humans weren't giving up. They weren't backing down. Zorath felt an unfamiliar emotion creeping inside him. It wasn't fear, but something close to it, something he couldn't quite name. The night was quiet, and Zorath lay on his bed in the barracks, staring up at the ceiling. He had won every physical challenge, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The humans had shown him that there was more to strength than just physical power. They had something deeper, something Zorath couldn't yet understand. For the first time in his life, Zorath felt a sense of uncertainty. He had entered Earth's boot camp expecting to be the undisputed champion, but now he wasn't so sure. In the darkness, Zorath closed his eyes, trying to push the strange thoughts away. He was a champion. He was strong. He was invincible. But as he drifted into sleep, the question lingered in his mind. What would happen if fear was not just something to be conquered, but something to be understood? And with that, Zorath's journey on Earth had only just begun. The boot camp had started, but so had his real challenge. It wasn't just about proving his strength anymore. It was about facing something that might change him forever. Zorath awoke the next morning to the harsh sound of an alarm ringing throughout the camp. The human recruits were already starting to stir, and the instructors began barking orders. Zorath, however, remained still for a moment, his mind clouded by the strange thoughts that had lingered from the night before. He had come to Earth expecting to prove his race's superiority, to show the humans just how powerful he was. But now, with every passing hour, he found himself wondering if the challenge was more complicated than he had first imagined. As the recruits gathered in the main training area, Zorath joined them. The instructors, who had seemed so confident when he first arrived, now watched him with an apprehensive gaze. They didn't know how to treat him. He was unlike any recruit they had ever seen. But they quickly resumed their work, treating him as they would any other soldier. Zorath could tell that they were afraid, but they masked it well. They had no choice but to keep pushing forward, even if they were unsure of what to do with someone like him. The first task of the day was a series of endurance drills. The human recruits were expected to run for miles through the forest, carrying heavy packs and overcoming natural obstacles like rocks, mud, and steep hills. Zorath had no doubt that he would finish first, just as he had done in every other challenge so far. His alien body was built for this. His muscles were strong, his stamina far greater than any human's. But as the group set off, Zorath began to notice something unusual. The humans, despite their apparent weakness, were not falling behind. They were pushing themselves, struggling, but they kept going. Some of them, like Jack, were clearly exhausted, their faces red and their breathing ragged. Yet they refused to slow down. Zorath watched in silence, a strange feeling creeping over him. These humans, they didn't know when to quit. No matter how difficult the task was, they kept moving forward, step by step, even when their bodies begged them to stop. Zorath ran ahead, his powerful legs propelling him forward with ease, but his eyes were on the humans. He couldn't understand it. How could they endure such pain and exhaustion without giving in? Even when their bodies seemed to be breaking, they kept going, pushing past their limits. It was as if they had an inner strength, a determination that Zorath had never seen before, and he couldn't help but wonder, what drove them? Was it fear? Was it something deeper than that? The course seemed to stretch on forever, but Zorath finished in record time, just as he expected. He was breathing heavily, but not because he was tired. He had barely broken a sweat. The humans, however, were still coming in, one by one, some limping, others falling to the ground as they crossed the finish line. Zorath stood at the end of the course, his eyes scanning the exhausted recruits as they finished. He saw Jack again, his face covered in dirt, his body trembling with exhaustion, but there was something in his eyes, something that told Zorath this young human had not only endured the challenge, but had found a way to push past it. Zorath's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. He turned to see the human instructor, a stern-looking man named Sergeant Hawk, walking towards him. The man's eyes were narrowed, but his expression was not one of anger. It was something else, something almost curious. Zorath stared down at the human, his towering frame making Sergeant Hawk appear small in comparison. "You did well," Sergeant Hawk said, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "But the others aren't as fast as you. They're not as strong, but they're still here. They didn't give up. Do you understand?" Zorath frowned, his mind racing. He didn't understand. Why hadn't they given up? What made these humans so different from everything he had ever known? Sergeant Hawk seemed to read the confusion in Zorath's eyes. "It's not about winning, Zorath," he said quietly. "It's about what happens when you think you can't go any further. It's about pushing through. It's about surviving." Zorath's brow furrowed as he tried to comprehend the human's words. To him, survival had always been about strength and power, about defeating your enemies and conquering your fears. But Sergeant Hawk was speaking of something else. Was it really about something as simple as not giving up? Was that what made humans strong? As Zorath pondered this, the next challenge began. It was a mental exercise, one that required the recruits to solve complex puzzles and navigate mazes. Zorath wasn't particularly concerned. His alien mind was sharper and faster than any human's. But as the exercise began, he noticed something strange. The humans weren't simply trying to solve the puzzles. They were helping each other. They were working together, sharing ideas, offering support when one of them became stuck. Zorath, however, was alone. He tackled the puzzle with ease, solving it quickly and moving on to the next one. But as he watched the humans work together, a sense of confusion washed over him. Why were they helping each other? Why not just focus on yourself and your own success? To Zorath, teamwork was a foreign concept. His people had always relied on individual strength. If you were strong enough, you didn't need anyone else. Yet here, on Earth, the humans seemed to understand something that Zorath hadn't. They weren't just relying on their own strength. They were relying on each other. They understood that survival wasn't just about one person beating the odds. It was about working together, supporting each other when times got tough. Zorath finished the mental exercises in record time. But as he looked at the humans around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were teaching him something. their resilience, their ability to endure, to push through pain and fear. These were things Zoreth had never truly understood. He had always thought of himself as the ultimate warrior, invincible and above all others. But now he wasn't so sure. The day wore on, and Zoreth's thoughts continued to swirl. As the sun began to set, the recruits gathered around a fire, their faces tired but filled with a sense of accomplishment. Zoreth sat apart from them, still processing everything that had happened. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like the strongest being in the room. The humans were weak, yes, but they were strong in ways that Zoreth had never considered. Jack approached him quietly, sitting down beside him. "You did good today," he said, his voice friendly, but filled with the exhaustion of a long day's work. Zoreth nodded, unsure of what to say. He had been expecting to be praised, to be recognized as the champion he was. But now, the words felt hollow. There was something more important than strength, something more important than winning. Jack smiled at him, as if sensing the confusion in Zoreth's mind. "You'll figure it out. Just don't be afraid to push yourself. We all have our limits, but it's what we do when we hit them that makes us who we are." Zoreth looked at Jack for a long moment, his mind racing. The human was right, but Zoreth wasn't sure if he was ready to face whatever this new challenge was. Still, he couldn't deny that something inside him had begun to change. For the first time, Zoreth felt a flicker of fear, but it wasn't the kind of fear he had always known. This fear wasn't about being defeated. It was the fear of not understanding, of facing something unknown. And that, in itself, was a challenge Zoreth had never anticipated. The next day arrived with a chill in the air. The sky was overcast, and the heavy clouds seemed to mirror Zoreth's inner turmoil. He had entered the bootcamp expecting to be the unquestioned champion, but with each passing day, his confidence wavered. The humans, despite their weakness in comparison to his alien strength, were teaching him something he hadn't expected. Fear. Not fear of failure, as Zoreth had always experienced in battle, but the kind of fear that made you question everything you thought you knew. The morning began with a combat exercise. This one was different. The recruits were to fight one another in a series of mock battles, and Zoreth's task was to face off against one of the strongest recruits. He was paired with a man named Kyle, a soldier whose size and strength came close to Zoreth's. Zoreth had never fought anyone who even remotely posed a challenge to him, but now, in the midst of his confusion, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. As the battle began, Zoreth wasted no time. His alien body moved with fluid grace, faster than the eye could track, and his strikes were quick and powerful. Kyle was strong, but Zoreth's strength was on another level. He easily outmatched his opponent, and within moments, Zoreth had Kyle on the ground, pinned beneath him. It was the same as every other fight. He was the victor. But as he looked down at Kyle's defeated form, something felt off. Kyle didn't give up. His face was bruised, his body covered in sweat, but he was still looking up at Zoreth, not with fear, but with something else, something that Zoreth couldn't place. The human's eyes were filled with a strange mix of respect and determination, as if he had learned something from this fight, even in defeat. Zoreth's heart raced as he released Kyle, unsure of what he had just experienced. The fight had been won easily, but it had felt different. There was something in the human's eyes that Zoreth had never seen before in his own people. Acceptance. The human had fought with everything he had, even though he knew he was outmatched. That kind of strength, Zoreth realized, wasn't just physical, it was mental. As Zoreth stepped away from Kyle, his mind raced. Why hadn't Kyle given up? It wasn't the first time Zoreth had won a battle, but it was the first time he felt like something was missing. He had always thought that victory was about proving your superiority, about crushing your opponent. But this felt different. Zoreth didn't know how to process it. The day dragged on as Zoreth continued to participate in the grueling training exercises. Each challenge seemed to test a different aspect of his abilities. strength, endurance, intellect, and even leadership. And with every passing moment, Zoreth found himself struggling to hold onto his sense of superiority. The humans, despite their limitations, were pushing themselves beyond what he had thought possible. They worked together, helping each other through the exercises, offering encouragement when one of them stumbled. It was something Zoreth had never seen in any of his battles, not in the Scylar warriors or the countless enemies he had defeated. The humans didn't just fight for themselves. They fought for each other. That night, after another long day of training, Zoreth sat alone in the barracks, unable to shake the thoughts swirling in his mind. His body was tired, but it wasn't physical exhaustion that weighed him down. It was something deeper. He had always believed that the strongest warriors were the ones who could defeat their enemies with ease. But now, after spending time with these humans, he wasn't so sure. The humans didn't just rely on their strength. They relied on something else, a will to survive, a determination to keep moving forward no matter the cost. Zoreth had always seen fear as a weakness, but now he was starting to wonder if it was fear that made these humans strong. The next morning, the recruits were gathered for a leadership exercise. The task was simple. Each recruit would be given a team to lead through a series of obstacles, and they had to work together to solve problems and complete challenges. Zoreth was chosen to lead one of the teams. As the others looked to him, their eyes filled with both respect and uncertainty, Zoreth felt the weight of the responsibility fall on his shoulders. He had never been a leader before. He was a fighter, a warrior who had always relied on his strength, but now he was expected to guide others. The team began the first challenge, crossing a river using only the materials they could find on the ground. Zoreth immediately started thinking of ways to use his strength to carry the others across, but the human recruits had other ideas. They didn't want to rely on Zoreth's strength. They wanted to solve the problem themselves. They worked together, gathering sticks and ropes, using their knowledge of the environment to build a makeshift bridge. Zoreth stood back, watching in awe as the humans coordinated their efforts. It was unlike anything he had seen before. They weren't just working together, they were thinking together. As the team successfully crossed the river, Zoreth couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. They had done it without his help, and that made Zoreth realize something important. The true strength of humans wasn't in their individual abilities, but in their ability to work together, to rely on each other when things got tough. Zoreth had always believed that strength came from individual power, but now he saw that strength could also come from unity. The humans didn't just survive on their own. They survived because they had each other. The rest of the exercise was filled with similar challenges. Zoreth began to understand what the humans had been teaching him all along. They weren't afraid to fail. They weren't afraid to make mistakes. And most importantly, they weren't afraid to rely on each other. They were a team, and together, they could accomplish anything. As the day ended, Zoreth found himself standing in front of the recruits once again, his mind full of new thoughts. He had entered the boot camp thinking that he was the strongest being in the universe, but now he knew that strength came in many forms. It wasn't just about physical power. It was about resilience, teamwork, and the ability to face your fears and keep going. The humans had shown him that. And in doing so, they had changed him in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. That night, as Zoreth lay in his bed, he closed his eyes and thought about everything he had learned. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he was the strongest. The humans had proven that strength wasn't always about defeating your enemies. Sometimes, strength was about facing the things that scared you the most and pushing through them. And as Zoreth drifted off to sleep, he realized that he had a lot more to learn from these humans than he had ever imagined. His journey had only just begun, and the real challenge was only just starting to unfold. It wasn't just about strength anymore. It was about something deeper, something that Zoreth had never known. And now he was beginning to see it. The following day, the training camp felt different. Zoreth could sense it in the air. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, an unspoken tension that ran through the camp like an electric charge. It was as though the humans knew something that he didn't, as though they were preparing for something big. Zorath had thought that the challenges of the previous days had been difficult, but he had no idea what awaited him now. It was the first time in a long while that he didn't feel certain of the outcome. The thought unsettled him. The day's exercises began with a briefing from Sergeant Hawk. He stood before the group, his voice steady but sharp, as always. "This is the final test," he said. "It's a full-day challenge, and it will test everything you've learned up until now. Strength, endurance, mental toughness, and most importantly, your ability to lead and support one another. You've all made it this far, but today will show what you're really made of. And for you, Zorath," he continued, looking directly at the alien, "today will be different. You won't be fighting alone." Zorath didn't speak. He simply nodded. His confidence had been shaken in recent days, and his pride had been bruised. He had always seen himself as a one-man army, the ultimate warrior, but now it was clear that the humans were teaching him lessons he hadn't expected. Today's challenge wasn't just about individual prowess. It was about something else entirely. Something Zorath wasn't sure he fully understood yet. The recruits were divided into pairs, and Zorath was paired with Jack. Zorath had watched Jack closely over the past few days. He wasn't the strongest recruit, but there was something about him that set him apart. Jack was never the fastest, nor the most skilled in combat, but he was always there when someone needed help. He had a quiet determination, a will to push through that was almost contagious. And now, Zorath was supposed to rely on him, just as Jack would need to rely on him. The thought was uncomfortable, but Zorath knew it was the only way to complete the challenge. The test began with an obstacle course designed to push the recruits to their physical and mental limits. The course stretched for miles through dense forest, steep hills, and treacherous ravines. There were obstacles meant to test agility, strength, and endurance. Zorath had no doubt that he could navigate the course with ease, but this time, it wasn't just about reaching the finish line first. He had to work with Jack. He had to help him. And Jack had to help him. That was the part that Zorath struggled to accept. The first obstacle was a wall, a massive, sheer rock face that had to be climbed. Zorath had no trouble scaling it, his alien strength allowing him to ascend effortlessly. But when he reached the top, he turned back to see Jack struggling below, his hands slipping on the smooth surface. Zorath hesitated. He could easily pull himself up and finish the course, but that wasn't the point. Jack needed help. Zorath extended a hand down, and Jack looked up, his eyes tired but filled with resolve. For a moment, Zorath saw the same determination in Jack's gaze that he had seen in the other recruits. Without hesitation, Jack grasped Zorath's hand, and with Zorath's strength, he was pulled to the top. "Thanks," Jack said, panting but smiling. Zorath said nothing, but something inside him shifted. This wasn't how he had imagined the challenge. He had always believed that success came from defeating your obstacles alone. But now, it was clear that something deeper was at play. Jack wasn't just relying on Zorath's strength, he was trusting him. And Zorath was beginning to realize that trust was a strength of its own. The next obstacle was a series of moving platforms over a deep chasm. The platform swayed and tilted, making it difficult to maintain balance. Zorath moved with ease, but Jack struggled, his legs shaking with each step. Zorath could have crossed easily on his own, but he stayed by Jack's side, offering support whenever Jack stumbled. Together, they'd made it across the chasm, Jack's breath heavy but grateful. As the course continued, Zorath began to feel a sense of unity with Jack. They were a team, and each step they took together brought them closer to the finish line. Zorath had always seen himself as a solitary warrior, but now he saw the value in cooperation. It wasn't just about being the strongest, it was about being there for each other, lifting each other up when the challenges seemed impossible. Jack's determination and willingness to work with him had taught him something important. Strength wasn't just about physical power. It was about being willing to trust and rely on others when things got tough. As the sun began to set, the final obstacle came into view. It was a massive pit of quicksand, and the only way to cross it was by using a series of ropes and pulleys. The challenge was designed to test not only physical strength, but also problem-solving and teamwork. Zorath immediately began to work with Jack, figuring out how to set up the ropes to cross the pit. But the quicksand was a tricky obstacle, and as they began to set up the pulleys, one of the ropes snapped, sending Jack tumbling toward the pit. Zorath's heart raced. He was faster than Jack, stronger, but Jack was now in danger. Without thinking, Zorath dove forward, grabbing Jack's arm just before he was swallowed by the quicksand. With all his strength, Zorath hauled him back to safety. Jack gasped, his heart pounding in his chest. "I thought I was done for." Zorath didn't respond right away. Instead, he pulled Jack to his feet, his alien eyes scanning the quicksand pit. The challenge wasn't over yet, and now they had to find a way to finish it together. "Don't worry, we'll make it through," Zorath said, his voice steady despite the growing tension in his chest. For the first time, he wasn't thinking of himself. He wasn't thinking of his own pride or power. He was thinking about Jack, about the team they had become. Together, they worked to fix the pulley system, ensuring that each step was taken with care. With each pull of the rope, with each move they made together, Zorath felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about overcoming obstacles together. And as they finally crossed the pit, Zorath knew that this was the moment when everything had changed. As the sun set behind them, casting long shadows over the camp, Zorath looked at Jack. The human was exhausted, his clothes torn and dirty, but there was a smile on his face. "We made it," Jack said, laughing with relief. Zorath nodded, a small, rare smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He didn't feel like the ultimate champion anymore. He didn't feel like the strongest warrior in the universe. But in that moment, he felt something much more valuable: connection. For the first time, Zorath understood the true meaning of strength. It wasn't just about power or superiority. It was about standing together in the face of fear, working through obstacles, and trusting each other to succeed. And as the camp's lights flickered on in the distance, Zorath realized that he had learned more than he ever expected from the humans. They hadn't just taught him how to survive. They had taught him how to live. The real challenge had just begun. And for the first time, Zorath wasn't afraid. The final day of training arrived with an air of quiet anticipation. Zorath had been through many battles and countless challenges, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to face. The lessons he had learned over the past few weeks had changed him in ways he hadn't fully understood until now. He had come to this boot camp with one goal: to prove that his strength made him the greatest warrior in the universe. But now, as he prepared for the last challenge, Zorath realized that the journey had been about something far greater than that. The recruits were gathered once more in the training yard, the familiar faces of the humans surrounding him. Sergeant Hawk stood at the front, his expression serious as always. He didn't speak at first, simply observing the group, his eyes scanning the recruits as if measuring something far deeper than their physical abilities. Zorath stood among them, his muscles taut with anticipation, but his mind was no longer focused on the physical challenges. The alien had learned a great deal about the humans, but more importantly, he had learned a lot about himself. The arrogance he once carried had been replaced by something else, a quiet understanding. He wasn't the only one who had something to prove. The humans, despite their limitations, had been fighting their own battles, and they had shown him time and time again that strength wasn't just about power. It was about resilience, unity, and heart. "This is the final test." Sergeant Hawk finally spoke, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You will face an obstacle unlike any other. It is not just a test of your strength, or your intelligence, or your ability to fight. It is a test of everything you have learned. It is about how far you have come, and whether you have the courage to face your greatest fears. It is about what you've learned about yourself and those around you. Zoreth's heart began to pound. He had no idea what the final test would be, but the gravity of the moment was clear. This wasn't just another challenge. It was something deeper, something that would force him to confront the lessons he had learned in a way he couldn't have imagined. The recruits were led to a massive training arena, an expansive field surrounded by walls of steel. In the center, there was a towering structure, imposing, dark, and foreboding. At the base of the structure, a large screen displayed the final challenge, the Fear Gauntlet. Sergeant Hawk stepped forward, his eyes locking with Zoreth's for a brief moment before turning to address the group. You will enter this structure and face your worst fears. It could be anything, your greatest weaknesses, your most vulnerable moments, or even the things you dread most in the world. You will face these fears alone, but you will not face them in isolation. Each of you has learned the power of teamwork, and now you will be tested individually. You must face your fear, overcome it, and make it out alive. Zoreth's breath caught in his throat. He had faced many enemies, had seen death countless times, and had been trained to endure the toughest of conditions. But fear, he had always seen fear as a weakness, something to be conquered in the heat of battle. But now, as he stood on the edge of the Fear Gauntlet, the very idea of confronting his deepest fears sent a chill down his spine. The recruits lined up at the entrance to the structure. Zoreth stood at the front, his mind racing. What could his fear possibly be? Was it his own vulnerability, his people's decline, or perhaps it was the realization that he wasn't as invincible as he once believed? Whatever it was, he knew he would have to face it head-on. One by one, the recruits entered the structure, each of them disappearing into the dark, their fates unknown. Zoreth's turn came next. He stepped forward, his fists clenched, his mind focused. The doors to the Fear Gauntlet creaked open, and he entered without a word. The moment he crossed the threshold, Zoreth's senses were overwhelmed by a sense of darkness and dread. The air was thick with tension, as if something was waiting for him. He tried to steady his breath, to push past the suffocating feeling in his chest, but it only grew stronger. His footsteps echoed in the silence, each one reverberating in the vast, empty space around him. Suddenly, the darkness parted, and he found himself standing in a familiar place, his home planet. The skies were gray, and the ground was barren, covered in ash. The once beautiful landscape of his people was now desolate, a symbol of everything that had been lost. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and in the distance he saw the ruins of his people's great cities. Zoreth's breath caught in his throat as the scene unfolded before him. This was his greatest fear, the fall of his civilization, the end of everything he had known. His heart pounded in his chest as he walked through the ruined streets, seeing the empty, lifeless faces of his people. Their once proud city was nothing more than a pile of rubble, a shadow of its former glory. But as Zoreth continued through the ruins, something changed. He saw a small group of survivors, a handful of people, weak and wounded, but still alive. They looked to him, their eyes filled with hope. They saw him not as a conqueror, not as a champion, but as someone who could help them rebuild, someone who could lead them to a new future. In that moment, Zoreth understood something. The destruction of his people was not his greatest fear. It was the idea that he could not protect them, that he could not save them. The true fear was not the loss of power or strength, but the fear of failure, the fear of being unable to protect those who depended on him. With that realization, Zoreth stood tall. He had always been afraid of losing control, of showing weakness. But now he knew that true strength wasn't in dominance or fearlessness. It was in the ability to rise up after defeat, to protect those who needed him most. The vision faded as Zoreth took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had faced his fear, and he had overcome it. As the darkness lifted, he saw the exit ahead. With one last glance at the remnants of his old world, Zoreth stepped forward, walking out of the fear gauntlet stronger than ever before. Outside, the recruits were waiting for him. Each of them had faced their own fears, and now they stood together, their eyes full of understanding. They had all made it through, and they had learned the most important lesson of all. Zorath wasn't alone anymore. He had learned that true strength came not from power, but from the ability to face fear and to keep going, no matter the cost. The humans had shown him that. They had taught him how to be not just a warrior, but a leader, a protector. As the sun set behind them, Zorath turned to his new comrades, a sense of peace settling over him. The fear that had once consumed him was gone, replaced by something far stronger, hope. For the first time in his life, Zorath understood that strength wasn't just about fighting battles. It was about the courage to face what lies ahead and to stand tall, even in the darkest of times. And with the humans by his side, he knew that anything was possible.